The difficulty challenge is a challenge achievement/trophy hunters undertake in which they are tasked with completing a series of games ranging from a 1 out of 10 difficulty to a 10 out of 10 difficulty. Welcome back to Socks and Sandals, and today we will be doing the Achievement Hunters Difficulty Challenge. Many of you may be asking, how is a game's difficulty determined? Obviously, difficulty is subjective, but a good resource for this challenge in particular are game guides. If there wasn't a guide made for a game I was looking up, I would use True Trophies or PSN profiles. Now, in deciding which games to use for this challenge, I limited myself to games I physically own and have not unlocked any achievements for. I wanted to do it this way to have more of a variety from other YouTubers who have completed this challenge, and to also play more games in my backlog. I would also like to mention, whereas a lot of other trophy/achievement hunters like to combine this challenge with a speedrun challenge, i.e. completing the challenge in 30 days, I did not. In fact, I did the exact opposite. But enough with the preamble, let's get this challenge started. Surprisingly, at the time of starting this challenge, I didn't have a lot of 1 out of 10 games, especially ones I had not played previously. But after browsing my collection for a few moments while also cross-referencing Xbox achievements, I settled on Black Mirror. Not to be confused with the Netflix series. I did, however, confuse this with the Don't Nod game Twin Mirror, but that's besides the point. Black Mirror is a point-and-click adventure game with a gothic horror aesthetic. It was developed by King Art Games and released in 2017 for the Xbox One and PS4. It is also a reimagining of the original trilogy from 2003. I'm actually quite a fan of point-and-click games. And with the horror elements, I was glad to start the challenge off with this game. With this being the 1 out of 10, a majority of the achievements were earned by simply playing the game. However, while following a guide, the missable achievements were easy to gain. That being said, I actually didn't start off using a guide. I played the first 2 chapters using intuition and my knowledge from games similar to this. The puzzle solutions were easy enough to figure out, and what to do next was well enough to intuit. Progressing into Chapter 3, however, things became much more esoteric, as well as much more buggier. The overall quality of the game began to wane as the chapters progressed. Things became so messy and confusing that a game I was enjoying at the start became a chore to experience. At one point, I experienced a literal game-breaking bug where I wasn't being able to progress into the hidden caves, the ending area of the game. When I was able to get into the final area, the achievement for doing so didn't unlock. I actually unlocked the achievement for completing the final chapter before unlocking that one. But after reloading a save at the start of the chapter and regaining access to the caves, the achievement unlocked, marking the first game completed for the challenge.
Just listen to my voice. One step back, then to your left.
My overall thoughts on Black Mirror are middling at best. As previously stated, I was enjoying the first portion of the game. I found the story to be overall engaging, the Irish setting was also pretty cool, as well as the puzzle elements within this first half. But after a certain point, the quality takes a nosedive and becomes a bit of a frustrating mess. Thankfully, I was able to earn all of the achievement. If I was unable to do so, I would be a lot less forgiving. Moving on to Game 2, there was a few number of games with the 2 out of 10 difficulty. Loads of them being movie tie-in games or some Telltale games. I, however, chose a game that had actually released relatively close to when I started this challenge. The guide for this game actually didn't have an Xbox counterpart, so I had to rely on PSN profiles. Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters is the game I chose for my number 2 spot. The only game I've actually played in the Neptunia series prior to this one was Four Goddesses Online, but I like to group the Neptunia games with the Senran Kagura series. Games where fan service is valued more than, say, gameplay. I can actually appreciate this tactic from time to time. Needless to say, I was looking forward to this one. The overarching genre of Sisters vs. Sisters is a character RPG. For those familiar with the Neptunia characters, you play as Netgear, Uni, Ram, and Ram, the titular sisters of the Neptunia goddesses. The gameplay is rather simplistic, but so are a majority of the achievements, most of which are your typical RPG grind achievements, i.e. spend 1 million credits, defeat over 2,000 enemies, fight in 500 battles, and etc. However, probably the grindiest achievement is to get every character to level 99. There are 8 total characters, and with the overly simplistic combat, the leveling grind grows tedious really fast. But it wasn't too much of a bother. I just went to the upper floors of the Neptral Tower with experience buffing discs and was able to get this one done in a matter of hours. Kind of worryingly, a Platinum-esque achievement was present in Sisters vs. Sisters. And for anyone who has experienced these achievements before, they are well known for being problematic. Thankfully, this was not such a case. So, after popping the Perfect Sister achievement for unlocking all achievements, we completed the second game for the challenge. These type of games are definitely my guilty pleasure. I understand they are simplistic and overly fan-servicey, but I had a lot of fun with Sisters vs. Sisters. All in, it took me 10 days to earn all of the achievements, and I'm glad to see a Neptunia entry on the Xbox. I'd love to see more of them on Xbox, and would kill to see a Senron Cognitive, but that's probably a pipe dream. If there was ever a definitive answer for the most underrated game released in 2025, the third game for the challenge is it. From probably my favorite AA developer Don't Nod, introducing my game of the year in 2025, Banishers Ghosts of New Eden. Banishers is another character action RPG set shortly after the colonization of America. You play as Rory, or Red, as he is often referred as. And you are a banisher. Somewhat like a medium, but your job is to either banish or ascend spirits that are plaguing the living. This is probably the biggest proponent on why I like this game so much. Meeting people afflicted by some form of haunting and then learning the lore of the ghost and their reason for haunting kept me thoroughly invested. The achievements once again were pretty straightforward. Though, at the start, I struggled to come to grips with the combat. So, a few of the combat-related achievements gave me some trouble in the early days. But after playing long enough, I got used to it. Following a collectible guide, I earned a vast majority of the achievements on my first playthrough. The guide recommended making a save and reloading to earn the second ending, but because I love this game so much, I thought it would be a travesty not to fully experience what Banishers had to offer. So I played through the entire game again, completing the bad ending, earning the subsequent achievement and thus unlocking another Platinum-esque achievement, Master Banishers. If you haven't played Banishers and you're into character RPGs, or maybe you're into ghost stories as much as I am, I can't recommend Banishers enough. The story is compelling, the visuals are stunning, and the gameplay is fun and engaging. Not to mention a fairly easy full completion. But enough glazing Banishers, on to the 4 out of 10. If nothing else could be said, at least this challenge is having me play many different genres, especially ones in which I may have never tried on my own. Now, I'm no stranger to first-person shooters, but sniping was never my forte. I was present while Nathan played Sniper Elite, but I had very little interest in playing the game myself. That's why I didn't really have high hopes for the 4th game. But there really wasn't a lot to choose from for my collection, and I was willing enough to give it a shot. That game in question being Sniper Elite's lesser counterpart, Sniper Ghost Warrior. For this challenge, however, we will be jumping straight to the 3rd entry on the Xbox One. I don't know if the story is a continuation from the other 2 games, but in 3, our main character is in a rural Russian city to stop an insurgent group and to find his brother who was captured years prior. The gameplay loop revolves around gaining missions from your military contact or via the local militia to infiltrate enemy encampments to eliminate certain key figures or retrieve intel or what have you. The game is developed by CI Games, who would go on to make Lords of the Fallen, and uses the Cry engine. The game doesn't look half bad, but it definitely has some AA jank at times. Some of the fun achievements involved skill shots, like the one that tasks you with getting 3 kills with 1 bullet, or getting a headshot from 500 meters away with a ×10 scope. At this stage in the challenge, I wasn't really feeling any great difficulty changes. Of course, Sniper Ghost Warrior was more difficult than Black Mirror, and I did find myself dying often enough, but it wasn't anything unmanageable. In fact, I think Vanishers was more difficult. But if my meter is based off the guide maker, then that's what I have to go off of. There are 3 different biomes in Ghost Warrior 3, and each area has its own side missions and most wanted targets to complete and subsequently take out. These and the typical semi-open world menial tasks that would fit well in a Far Cry are the bulk of what the achievements are tied to. And of course, with following a guide, earning the 100% completion achievements wasn't hard at all. And after almost 26 hours of playtime, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 was complete. It took me a bit before I actually got into the game, but once I did, I had a lot of fun with it. I can't tell you an ounce of what the story involved other than your brother defecting to the Russians. Spoiler alert. But the stealth/sniper gameplay was enjoyable. It sucks that the other 2 numbered titles require multiplayer achievements, because I wouldn't mind attempting full completions of them. Otherwise, there is the spin-off Contract series, but I digress. We've officially reached the halfway point, and the point at which we really start to feel the difficulty. I went with Hitman Blood Money for the 5 out of 10, and since I'm more or less a newbie to the Hitman series, it was a huge learning experience for me. The worst achievements for Blood Money are Professional Mode Complete for completing the game on Professional, 5 Professional Silent Assassins for earning 5 Silent Assassin ratings on Professional, and All Firearms Collected for collecting all firearms and displaying them in the hideout. I know, completely original achievement titles. Oh, and to make matters worse, the difficulty achievements do not stack. So, we are required to beat the game 4 times over to unlock the corresponding achievement. Honestly, in hindsight, being required to play this way was a godsend. Because if I had just started on Professional outright, I probably wouldn't have been able to complete Blood Money. I struggled enough on Rookie on my first playthrough, especially when going for the Silent Assassin ratings. I'll admit, the freedom to assassinate targets in any manner the player chooses is really cool. However, with this game being released early in the Xbox's life cycle, the AI can be a bit finicky and frustrating, and the controls seemed a bit unresponsive. For reference, getting spotted when you press the button to garrote someone and 47 just does nothing, costing the Silent Assassin rating, it begins to become harder to have fun. The main stages that gave me trouble were Flatline, just due to the stage having tons of security and being required to be in restricted areas quite often. Next up, A New Life, due to having to kill the 2 targets while they are constantly being monitored. Then the Murder of Crows, I probably hate this level the most due to being on a time limit, and your 3 targets have random spawn locations. Amendment 25 is troublesome as well, just when trying to kill the Vice President before his wife walks in, which will alert like 6 Marines standing just outside the door. And finally, we have Requiem, the final level that plays out during the credits. This level is difficult because you are absolutely surrounded and were only pronounced dead moments before. But with perseverance, we push through each challenging stage on each difficulty. My go-to stages for Silent Assassin were A Vintage Year, Curtains Down, Death on the Mississippi, Till Death Do Us Part, and House of Cards. Death on the Mississippi and House of Cards could be a little troublesome due to them requiring multiple target eliminations and the stages being extremely long, but compared to my most hated, they weren't too hard. Surprisingly, in the time it took me to complete the first 3 games, I spent on Blood Money alone. So things are certainly becoming more difficult. Much like with the first game in the challenge, Game 6 was a game I confused with something else. But after completing it, I'm glad I did. That game being Tales of Iron. I actually confused this game with Steel Rats, which I now believe is a PS4 exclusive for the physical version. Nevertheless, Tales of Iron is a very stylistic side-scrolling action RPG. This game also has the distinction of being the first game in the challenge to have DLC and, subsequently, DLC achievement. Because I am an achievement hunter and not a platinum hunter, I have to do all DLC achievements as well. Little bit of foreshadowing for you. But what makes Tales of Iron a 6 out of 10 on the difficulty scale is the achievement A New War Chief Rises for killing Greenwort in Bloody Whisker mode. A title update difficulty mode that of course makes enemies tougher and hit harder. The training wheels were officially off for this one. Looking back comparatively to the later games, it wasn't all that frustrating, but at the time I genuinely did not think I could complete the game. One achievement in particular, Complete Arena Faction, was one of the toughest achievements I'd earned thus far. I'm not sure how tough this arena is on lower difficulty, but some of the arena enemies on Bloody Whiskers were absolutely brutal. Not to mention a reoccurring crux for a lot of these games, a small bit of jank made things much more frustrating. From seemingly unresponsive controls to BS hitboxes to boss enemies just straight up cheating at times. But as frustrating as the game was at times, I was still really enjoying it. The art style was absolutely eye-catching, the story was enthralling, and Doug Cockle providing the voice of the narrator was just the icing on the cake.
For centuries and longer, rats have fought tirelessly to repel the incessant frog invasions.
Thus, within 13 days, I had completed Tales of Iron and its 2 DLC packs and was left thoroughly impressed, meaning I am most assuredly going to play the sequel to completion as well. You know, whenever I can get around to it.
Reggie wondered if the moles would make him a Thornbuster suit.
Up to this point, I think the game I liked the least was Blood Money, which honestly wasn't that bad. I'll probably never play another classic Hitman game again, but it was fine, which was completely welcomed. I'm glad to have played and experienced 6 new games and actually had fun. Unfortunately, the fun won't continue for much longer. For now, we begin the 7th game. I decided to go with an Xbox One launch title and a second game to feature DLC. That game being ReCore Definitive Edition. ReCore is a third-person action platform. When the game originally released, it wasn't received too well. In my experience, I can fully understand the middling reviews. The combat was the weakest link. After playing the game for a few hours, I was absolutely done with any combat encounter. I would have preferred to just avoid them, but unfortunately, there were several achievements for getting you and your core bots to max level. So, grinding combat encounters was necessary. Not to mention that the environments were outrageously huge and contained a lot of empty space that you just had to slog through, picking up hundreds of hardware pickups with the only way to speed things up being a slight jet boost from your shoes. That is, until you unlock the tank bot. Sucks for the player though, because you only unlock the tank bot until really late into the game. The best part of ReCore by far is the platforming freedom and the corresponding challenge dungeons. I think these dungeons and the boatload of collectibles are the reason the guide maker gave ReCore a 7 out of 10 ranking. While some challenge dungeons gave me some trouble, especially when trying some of the speedruns, when compared to Blood Money or Tales of Iron, these weren't that bad. I found the collectibles to be much more frustrating. In one of the DLC biomes, you were required to find like 300 hardware pickups. I ran around this area for several hours looking for like 10 caches I was missing. It was so tedious and aggravating that I honestly almost gave up on 100%ing the DLC. But, thankfully I found the few I was missing and popped the achievement Starving Sea Surveyor. I honestly can't tell you anything in the slightest concerning the story, which is probably another reason the game didn't review well. And I think with the platforming being the only thing I really enjoyed, I would give the game a 4 out of 10 concerning likability, and wouldn't really recommend it to anyone. And that's honestly a shame. I'm sure the developers really tried to make something they could be proud of, and I think that if they just tweaked the enemies to be a lot less spongy, it would have felt a lot less tedious. Nevertheless, we move on. We're nearing the final stretch now, and Game 8 was a no-brainer to me once I discovered it was an 8 out of 10. Wasteland 2 is our 8th game, a classic CRPG brought to console. A game which I have heard is like Fallout, just from a top-down viewpoint. I would consider myself a big RPG fan, but I never played a CRPG before. That's actually a lie. I played Disco Elysium. So I was a little apprehensive. Not to mention that the reason Wasteland 2 is an 8 out of 10 on the difficulty scale is that nearly every achievement is missable. Of course, and thanks to the author on True Achievements, I followed a full achievement walkthrough guide. It may have been cheating, but even with a guide, the projected completion time was 80 plus hours. So I made the executive decision to follow a guide. With being new to the brutal and unforgiving combat of a CRPG, that is not a lie, because Disco Elysium doesn't have much combat. It was welcomed that the guide also provided character builds to help with progression through the game, as well as stats and skills you will need to unlock certain achievements. And in all honesty, even though I was hyper fixated on a guide, I still had a grand old time with Wasteland 2. The freedom of expression to complete quests in whichever way you want was fantastic. Depending on which members you had in your party or what skills they had, drastically changed a lot of the dialogue with NPCs and gave unique ways to finish quests. Another thing I really enjoyed were the achievements themselves. A lot of the achievements were simple and silly things that you needed to do. But will require several hours of setup to unlock, like having a member of your party turning into a pod person. You can have a party member get infected in the Ag Center quite easily. There are exploding pods everywhere. However, it takes 6 hours real time before they will turn. Obviously, you will want a manual save before doing this, unless you don't mind losing that party member forever. Another achievement that spans the entire game before it unlocks is not monkeying around, which requires you to beat the game with a party member in a gorilla costume. You get the gorilla costume in the Ag Center as well, which is an early area of the game. It is recommended to store the suit until you are near the end of the game. In the area of the Canyon of Titan, there are monks that worship the nuke, because what post-apocalyptic RPG would be complete without some faction worshipping radiation? But these monks will explode upon death as one of their abilities, and if one of your party members is hit by this explosion, while it may not kill them, it will evaporate their clothes. And once clothing items are destroyed, they are gone forever. Forgetting the achievements for a moment, Wasteland 2 was just really fun to play, and honestly, a great entry into the CRPG genre. I also didn't have any major issues while playing on console, if like me, you're exclusively a console gamer. And if you also play on Xbox, Wasteland 2 is on Game Pass. I highly recommend Wasteland 2. I enjoyed it so much, it not only was my runner-up for Game of the Year last year, but it also provided me with the impetus to play Baldur's Gate 3. The honeymoon is officially over. I've played some objectively hard games before. Trials HD, the Contagion mode in Callisto Protocol, even Wolfenstein 2. But nothing could have prepared me for what I'm in for next. Going into my 9 out of 10, I didn't think it could be too much of a struggle. I chose Trackmania Turbo because I'm a fan of racing games and find myself to be halfway decent at them. However, Trackmania Turbo is a lot less of a racing game and more of a physics-based puzzle game. I use the word physics loosely. Most of the game's physics don't make sense. Take, for example, being required to hold the gas while in the air to ensure you have enough speed. Or explain to me how a car with a stance so low to the ground it's practically touching, and has a wheelbase wide enough to fit a couch through, could roll over going around a corner. And don't get me started on the absolute twig-ass bushes that will stop you dead as if you ran into a dying star. The extremely tight lap times that were required for gold on some of these tracks drove me up a damn wall. When I first started this game and was originally going for the author times, I thought that would be the hardest the game had to offer. How naive I was. The red and black tracks for the drift car and the down and dirty car were some of the most frustrating and unfun things I have ever experienced. Tracks 125, 169, 170, and 172 being some of my most hated. Of course there were more, but my subconscious has blocked them out. I guess all in I am proud to have Trackmania Turbo's full completion, but I don't think it was worth the time and suffering to obtain. I spent around 240 hours in order to get every achievement. And from the word jump, I didn't enjoy this game in the slightest. I can honestly say that my experience with Trackmania can be described as anything but fun, and any synonym that could go along with it. The only reason I suffered through it was for the challenge, and I hoped it would make a good video. Because I was watching Trackmania videos on YouTube to get help with some of the tracks, I started getting recommended Virtual. I genuinely found him to be a funny YouTuber and quite skillful at Trackmania. However, as I became increasingly frustrated with Turbo, I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't want to see any Trackmania outside of what I was required to see while playing the game. So, I unsubscribed and set his videos to not recommended. It might be petty, but that's just what I felt I needed to do. When I finished Turbo, I didn't feel joy or euphoria. I felt relief. I was finally free of this game that had held me captive for hundreds of hours. I have vowed to myself that I will never play another Trackmania game for as long as I live. Just thank goodness it's nearly over. This is it, the final game. And up to Turbo, the challenge had been fun with only a few minor hiccups. It's crazy how one game can sour the whole experience. Now I was just ready for it to be over. For Game 10, I picked Ninja Gaiden 2. I've never been the biggest fan of character action games, i.e. Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, but I didn't believe anything could be as bad as Trackmania Turbo. Unfortunately for me, the worst was far from behind me. My first playthrough lured me into a false sense of security. For the first few chapters on Acolyte, I thought the combat was fun and the visceral nature of it made you feel like a badass. The later chapters and bosses provided much more of a challenge, however. Anytime I had to fight Genshin was a bad time. Not to mention the 2 flame armadillos, the second Alexi fight, and the final Elizabeth fight. But overall, I enjoyed my first playthrough. I thought the higher difficulties were of course going to be challenging, but I had no idea how bad it was actually going to be. One thing I was frustrated with, however, was the sheer amount of playthroughs the game required. Not only are you asked to play the game on Acolyte, Warrior, Mentor, and Master Ninja, but the game also rewards you with an achievement for beating the game using each of the 8 weapons only. For example, beating the entire game using only the Dragon Sword. This obviously has to be done on New Game Plus so that you have all of the weapons that you've unlocked from your first playthrough. Unfortunately, you can only play New Game Plus on a previously beaten difficulty, so no cheesing the higher difficulties. Well, not yet anyway, but more on that later. What we can cheese are the weapon playthroughs. What we need to do is play through the game using only projectiles and Ninpo, as far as we can, and then make a manual save and finish the game with each of the weapons. Reloading the save after beating the final boss and doing it again with a different weapon. As much of a slog as this got to be, I still didn't mind it too much. And Warrior difficulty still wasn't too bad. But once we started Mentor, things just got absurd. Most basic ninja enemies were replaced with ninja that throw incendiary shurikens, which is the literal first encounter of the game, and you can be dead in a matter of seconds, shortly after loading in. The first chapter on the higher difficulties is one of the toughest, only because you have so little health and the level 1 Dragon Sword kind of sucks. Again, Genshin really sucks, any fight against him really. And forgetting difficulty for a second, I think the boss in Chapter 2 is just poorly designed. It's just one I always hated having to fight. I also hate the fire armadillos, all 3 of them, as well as everything in Chapter 9. The worm boss is fucking ass, and there's a reason why they removed him in the Sigma version. The zombie enemies are really annoying, and I previously really hated the dual dragon fight until I realized in my final playthrough that you can kill them with 2 fully upgraded piercing void shots. But we buckled down and survived Mentor. I just wanted to note here before I discuss Master Ninja that like Recore and Tales of Iron, I intended on doing the Mission Mode DLC. Achievement hunting to me has always been the 100%, and not just the base 1000 gamer score. This is of course before I started Master Ninja. I was already tired of playing Ninja Gaiden during my Mentor playthrough, but really began loathing it on Master Ninja. Thus, I decided to change my goals for Ninja Gaiden 2 to just obtaining the base 1000. I'm sure I'll catch flack for copping out, and I flip-flopped on this for a while, but ultimately I concluded that after Trackmania Turbo, I wasn't going to suffer through something I wasn't enjoying for pointless clout on the internet. So, Ninja Gaiden 2 will be the sole game in this challenge, where I don't have the 100%. But on to Master Ninja, and I'm just going to say now, I cheated. It is now time to mention the cheese I referenced earlier. There is an invincibility glitch you can activate once you acquire a secondary weapon. For example, once you pick up the lunar staff, press up on the D-pad, go over to a weapon you aren't currently using, and hit X and B at the same time. If done correctly, Ryu should have no weapon equipped and should be unable to move. He will be immune to any enemy attack, however. The only way to move in this state is by jumping. Once you jump, you should be able to move, but you are also unable to attack with any weapon. However, you can attack using the guillotine throw. Now, even though you are invincible to all attack damage from enemies, it doesn't make the game a cakewalk. Hell, you still have to make it to the lunar staff in the first chapter before you can use the glitch. I spent quite a long time trying on the fight just before getting the staff, and honestly felt like giving up. But I persevered and was able to get the staff.
Fucking finally. See, I don't know why.
Of course, there were also moments throughout the game where you cannot guillotine throw enemies and will be forced to fight outside the glitch. The workaround I used in situations like this, especially during boss fights, was to jump and then hit up on the D-pad. After I selected my weapon, which takes you out of the glitch, by the way, I would use an air attack. My go-to being the XXY combo with the staff, and upon landing I would go back into the glitch. Rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. As a side note, the YYY combo with the scythe is good for Alexi, Genshin, and Elizabeth. Another good strategy for Master Ninja is to simply run past enemies or run back as far as you can to the start to despawn enemies. This of course sacrifices any essence you would have otherwise gained, which is essential to upgrading your weapons or purchasing health items. Of course, these are situations that need to be weighed during gameplay. Finally, however, we reach the end of Ninja Gaiden 2, beat the Archfiend, and complete the game on Master Ninja. While using the glitch, I would consider Ninja Gaiden to be a bit more digestible than Trackmania Turbo. Without the glitch, this game, without a doubt, would be well deserved of the 10 out of 10. But with the Way of the Master Ninja unlocked, that's the Achievement Hunter's difficulty challenge complete. I started this challenge on December 1st, 2024, and only completed the final achievement on May 12th, 2026. A little over a year and 5 months, with Ninja Gaiden 2 taking 5 months alone. All I can say is that up until Trackmania and Ninja Gaiden, I was having fun. Those two games alone tarnished the entire experience. I don't want to say that I hate challenging games. I like a decent challenge. But if it's a challenge I'm not in any way enjoying, then I just don't think I can force myself to continue playing in the future. I don't think I'll ever do another difficulty challenge again. There are several other challenges regarding achievements I would like to undertake. I would just have to find the time to start them. But with that all being said, most of the games featured in this challenge I would recommend at least a playthrough. I would say skip on Recore, and if you're far more skilled at character action games than I am, then give Ninja Gaiden 2 a shot. Though I would recommend the newly released Black version instead. The game's controls are still wonky, but they made a lot of other quality of life changes that would have been much appreciated in my playthrough. Trackmania Turbo can do one, however. With that, if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing. I have many more achievement hunting videos to watch through. Also, likes would be very much appreciated. Likes help recommend the videos to other like-minded viewers. And if you've played any of the games from the challenge, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. And if there are any games you'd like to see me get the full completion on, leave those in the comments as well. But other than that, check back next time for whatever I do. Bye-bye!